Welcome back, everybody. So I think a lot of us have seen the article. I shouldn't say the article, the actual USDA page. I'm going to put a link in the description box below for you guys to take a look at. But essentially, what's happening is the UN has put out an initiative about sustainable growing agriculture, and the USDA has now created and implemented an actual program in which everyday people can voluntarily register their gardens. Now, obviously, the first thing you hear is the conspiracy theory saying, hey, they're going to make everybody register their gardens so they can come confiscate them or do whatever. So obviously, that's the sexy shit, right? That's the shit that sells, you know. So obviously, you have a lot of influencers that are going out and, you know, making this into something that it's clearly not. Now, with that being said, we're going to talk about all opportunities, but I think that when we automatically go to these fear porn tactics, it does us a great disservice because it now prevents the conversation of actually what is going on, which is far more dangerous than this idea that they want to register everybody's gardens. The actual contextual knowledge here that this affords the government is something much, much bigger than just a registry. Now, the first thing I noticed with this initiative is the wording, right? We see things like food sustainability, food equity, you know, we see a lot of things in regards to, you know, basically secure food solutions. And what that really comes down to, you know, for a lot of us that actually know how to translate the wokeism, is this idea that there is a food shortage, right? This idea that there is not enough food to go around, this idea that people of color, people that look like me, somehow do not have access to food security. So that's really what this is about. You know, this is about an initiative that, no, basically it's the government saying, hey, we know there's not enough food to go around. Not only is there not enough food to go around, there's not enough food solutions within big urban communities. So the immediate problems for me, right, the problematic matters immediately that I see are, hey, globally, nationwide, nationally, whatever you want to call it, there's just not enough food to go around. We're worried about not only not enough food going around, but the sustainability of the infrastructure in place. So that's number one. Number two is this food equity idea that, hey, there are certain people that look like me that don't have access to this food, apparently, don't have access to nutrition, don't have food security. Therefore, what's the only option the government knows how to take? Wealth redistribution. And that is simply what I see this initiative to be. And maybe it's just because I'm taking their word for it because they're telling me that's what they're literally saying, but it makes sense. Now let's talk about what's not being said. As with any initiative, right, there's tracking, right? If you go to the website, we can see that every garden that's registered can be geo-tracked. You can upload photos, the whole 9 yards. So you're basically coming into the agreement with the USDA that you're going to do things a certain way. And one of those things is you're going to abide by all state, federal, you know, and local laws. That's literally one of the questions for, you know, signing up for this initiative. So what's not spoken, right, which we know is going to be happening, is what they're going to be doing with this data. And then what are they going to do with the metadata? Because for me, that's the most interesting part of this, because I personally don't see it realistic that they can go in and shut down every garden. But what I think they find far more interesting is not shutting people's gardens down, but the knowledge they learned from it. The ability to take all this information in the aggregate, right? Locations, what people are growing, how they're growing, etc. So being able to take all this information in the aggregate, put it through enough computing power that you can create all these options, right? And again, I don't know what that is, but they're obviously going to learn something. They're going to learn something about people like us that garden. And for me, that's the most interesting thing. To me, that's what I see as being, you know, possibly the most problematic portion. Why are they doing that? What are they planning to learn from this initiative, right? Is the initiative simply to get data and redistribute wealth? Well, that's scary in of itself. Is it simply to showcase the fact that there's food insecurity and we're going to see global nationwide shortages? That's problematic. But then you add the third, which is what they're going to gain insight-wise. That's another level of crazy. This initiative is very clear, and the USDA stance is very clear, right? They believe a climate crisis is at hand. They believe in food equity. They believe that there's not enough food to go around. They believe there's food insecurity. So if they believe all these things, why can't we believe that they believe that? And that's the one thing about preppers, homesteaders, people that are prepared-minded, especially these large conglomerate channels, right? These large, prepper channels, prepper communities. I don't know why they have such a hard time believing the USDA's mission statement. I don't know why they have such a hard time believing when the federal government says they want equity, that they're not going to set forth to get equity. I just don't understand why they don't believe that. I don't understand why they have to immediately go down this conspiracy rabbit trail of they want all gardens to be registered so they can come take them. I mean, it makes us sound so dumb. It really does. So my rational common sense mind says, okay, so what are examples of policies that can be implemented that a government would take to address food insecurity, to address climate change, climate catastrophe, food equity, food insecurity, food sustainability? What can we expect the government to do? And I think it's very clear. Getting rid of and outlawing petrol type chemicals, right? Anything that they would deem as being bad for the environment. And that's number one. Number two, carbon taxes, especially carbon taxes in areas where it's predominantly people that don't look like me, right? Predominantly white folk, right? And so I can see that they can be using this information in the aggregate to implement these policies that we already see here and see abroad. So what does this look like in real life? Well, hypothetically speaking, right? We get some good aggregate data from Omaha, Nebraska, Dallas, Texas, Raleigh, North Carolina, Seattle, Washington, Portland, Oregon, Bakersfield, California. And this aggregate data will probably show, hypothetically speaking, that 95+% of the people that register gardens are white. And predominantly these more especially affluent areas within these city epicenters have a higher carbon footprint, which makes sense because the more money you have, the more ability you have to travel and buy shit. And so what's going to happen is I can see the government saying, which we've already seen happen here and abroad, well, there's a relatively higher carbon footprint, so we're going to tax the shit out of these fuckers, right? So we're going to tax them, and we're going to take that money and we're going to create another initiative in which we are going to redistribute this to the fucking hood. So guess what, Atlanta, Georgia? You're about to get a people's garden, my dude. Another real possibility to look at is the government saying, hey, you know what, we're going to ban certain gardening and farming implements. And we've seen this on local levels. In the city of Los Angeles, we've seen that for public works, they have been restricted on what kind of fertilizers they can use. The city of Malibu has banned all use of chemical fertilizers for city use. So we've seen this, and abroad we've seen countries that have completely said, you know what, we're not doing any kind of, we're only doing organic farming. No kind of chemicals, fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides can be used. Now, with that being said, I'm a big supporter of growing food naturally. I will always choose that, and I do actually, if I'm being 100% honest with you, I think it's a great idea that, that you have local municipalities that have said enough is enough, we're not going to use these types of implements. But what happens if they do that on a larger scale? Or what happens if your local municipality government, you guys can't use X, Y, and Z. We're not going to allow you guys to use these fertilizers anymore because of equity, because of food justice, because of climate change, right? Again, I'm not talking about things that are outside the realm of possibilities. I'm talking about things that have already factually happened. Next, we have to talk about the real implications of licensure, right? Because if we look at this logically, if we look at this from a mathematical, just look at it from a mathematical, economic perception, both from a governmental sense and private corporate sense, this data can only be helpful to those entities that are trying to make more money. So let's talk about licensure for a second. If you have a place like Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, Raleigh, North Carolina, all the places that we've already aforementioned, and they have a very good data scatter that says we have X amount of people within these metropolitan areas that have got gardens. So let's say they get a good spread of 200 people have registered on the USDA website for the Raleigh, North Carolina area. And let's say the government says, you know what? We want to spread equity, we want to spread food security, we want to make sure that we have food resources for everybody. So what if they say, in order to have a garden in our metropolitan area, you need to buy a permit or a license. It's $10 a month, and we are going to do this to fight climate change, to be equitable, food security, the whole 9 yards. And they know based upon the data that for every one garden that's registered, there's 20 that aren't, which we know would probably be much higher. But let's just say, let's lowball it, 20 that haven't. That would mean that would be around 4,000 gardens in the metropolitan area at $10 a month. You're talking about over $500,000 they could generate yearly just off licensure. And don't tell me this is outside the realm of possibilities. I mean, people register their firearms in certain states. You know, most places in the country, if you have a dog, you have to register the dog through the county. So don't tell me that this is somehow out of pocket or, you know, out of the realm of possibilities. You're already registering stuff. You're registering your car, you're registering your dogs, you're registering all sorts of different things out there. So the idea that you wouldn't have to register a garden, again, it's a very real possibility. And corporate entities are going to have the same data that the governments have. So take Raleigh, like we already mentioned. If the municipal water servicer for Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina knows that there are 200 registered gardens, and of those 200 registered, they know that for every one that's registered, there's 20 that is unregistered. Well, guess what? We now know that we can make over, over $500,000 by simply fiat, by putting a water surcharge on there. $10, $12 water surcharge that we're doing because we're trying to fight climate change. We're trying to be equitable. We're trying to do all the cool hashtag things. So we're gonna add the surcharge so we can help build up infrastructure, so we can help become greener, whatever fucking initiatives they wanna do. They can now justify it because they know people have gardens. They know people are going to pay the surcharge, or else what? What are they gonna do? Find another water servicer? So again, for me, this idea that the government's gonna somehow come and make us register our gardens so they can come and pluck them out one by one, it's so utterly ridiculous, and it's so unfortunate that this is what preppers want to get their heads caught up in. That's what they want to believe, when really the truth is way more scary. You know, ultimately, I think that regardless of if you register or not is irrelevant, because there are people that already have. There's lots of people that have already started to register, and they will continue to register. And as the stakes get higher, as government entities put more and more and more benefits on registering and make it more appealing, they're going to get more data, and that data is going to be used for something. And again, if we're just taking a look at what's already occurred, more licensure, more taxes, more banning of goods and services. This is what it is. This is the truth. This is the reality that we find ourselves in today. And really the only way to combat this, and I know that nobody wants to hear this, but you have to get active, especially locally. I mean, look what happened in Florida, right? You literally had a couple that had to take their case all the way to the Supreme Court because they were gonna lose everything because they had a garden in their front yard. It wasn't until the governor signed SB 82 that changed everything. But even with SB 82, it basically says that gardening is a constitutional protected right. Well, that's great, but that doesn't mean that constitutionally protected right can't be taxed. There can't be surcharges based upon corporate entities' wants and needs. It doesn't mean that the government can't, by fiat, say, hey, we're not going to allow you to use these kind of fertilizers anymore. You can still garden, you just can't use fertilizers. You can still garden, but hey, if your water supplier wants to charge you an extra $15 surcharge, they can. Oh, well, if your local municipal government wants you to stop using X, Y, and Z, or wants you to have a license, you can still garden, you just have to pay a license. Overall, it's sad that preppers in the preparedness community, they don't want to talk about the facts. They don't want to talk about real solutions, solution-based preparedness. They just want to be entertained. They want to scare themselves silly with fear porn, and they want to stockpile and hoard. And it's unfortunate because there are real conversations to be had, and there's real consequences and repercussions to all the aforementioned, and the fact that they want to stay stigmatized by conspiracies and not really take their head out of the sand and look for solutions is, you know, it's disheartening, but it is what it is. There you go. Tell me what you think about it. Tell me what you think is going to happen. Tell me what you think all this means. And as always, guys, long live the Republic.